Welcome to another Freedom Friday. It is Friday and you are still not free, but hopefully you will be more free at the end of today's show. Good morning, Sharif El Mekki. How you doing this morning, brother?
Good morning. Doing well. Glad to be here. Good to see you. See straight, I'm looking forward to helping others see straight, so
that's exactly what the goal is. The goal is to help people see straight, because I think people are, like I've said to you recently, are crooked as hell.
So listen, wavy, wavelengths are wavy, you know what I mean? The light is not going straight. So
no,
but glad to be here, for another Freedom Fridays.
Week by week. To me, there are things that I do just because it's a job. There are things that I do like this that I do because it's replenishing to the soul to know that I'm not crazy. So talking to you is like my opportunity each week to say, no, I'm not crazy. The stuff that I've been thinking about all week. And, last night, the presidential election or presidential debates were last night, the last in the series. Did you watch it?
Yeah, watched it.
Watch it. It looked like a Geritol commercial, bro. But I'll say this much about it: like, how are you gonna have the last? Because I've watched them all now, and I just expected, okay, they're just putting education off. It'll come at some point. Like they set up 5-6 questions each one of these, so they have to have one on education. I mean, 30 million kids, 33 million kids, 3 million teachers. 90,000 to 100,000 schools, 15,000 districts, millions and millions and millions of parents, community members, and the future of the nation at stake. Yeah. You have to talk about education at some point. Never came. It never came, man. They got all the way through the end.
Unless it's related to COVID, there's nothing about learning, and that's unfortunate. Very unfortunate. And it shows where the priorities. That's easy, right? Like, I'm not making your promises, so you can't, there's no accountability for what I said on the campaign trail about the learning and the teaching and the education. As you mentioned, this, all the principles, even, at no point, the impact of the 3 million teachers, but also the impact of the 100,000 principals, all, the principals, when we were in the, in the ambassador fellowship, at the U.S. Department of Education, we used to talk about, every year is like the year of the principal, right? October, we're in October. This is National Principals Month, so to speak. So, the idea that every public school principal around the country, across the entire United States, could fit in, let's say, University of Michigan's football stadium. 100,000, like they could all fit in there, and we don't have a message for them. About like what they should be doing and how the government is supposed to support them. What promises, as you said, are going to be made on behalf of, the government. And again, we just keep going back to this issue. Like, when does education get prioritized in this country? When does the education of increasingly Black and brown student population get prioritized in this country? I don't think it's coming. You
don't think it's in play?
Not immediately. I mean, I think that's, part of like what the resistance has to, everybody else has to prioritize it. So if we have the government not prioritizing it, and then we have, some of the legacy civil rights organizations not prioritizing it, and then you have local governments not it just keeps going around. Like, who's going to do it?
I mean, President Jimmy Carter in the 1970s would have said his main goal would have been to get resources into schools at a time in the 1970s when you had like the description of the schools by Colesall at that time was savage inequalities. You had schools that had no water in them. You had schools that had roofs falling off them. So I think if you were to ask Jimmy Carter when he was running, he was going to make schools more equal, desegregate schools, get kids out of like the ghettoized education system and into a mainstream American education system. I think when Reagan came along, Reagan would have told you that's when Nation at Risk and everything came along. So they told you that we were going to have schools that were going to be more accountable to outcomes. They were going to be looking at, that's where a lot of your standardized testing stuff became, accountability measures
coming.
Yeah. George W. Bush, I think probably similar to Reagan in those ways. Bill Clinton.
Soft bigotry of low expectations was his, school improvement line.
I think that was Bush too.
Yes, you're right.
Bush one. I can't remember what his was, but I do know each of these people. My point that I'm trying to make in each of these, without going all the way into what they were for, each of them wanted to be the education president. That's what they promised. They promised, I'm going to be the education president. I'm going to get our kids, America's going to be number one in education again. We're going to be getting kids to college at, unprecedented rates and everything. And that went all the way through Obama. The current president, his was, I'm going to get you some school choice. 4 years later, he's still saying, I'm going to get you some school choice. And it's kind of like, that, first of all, like when? Like when the next 4 years? Wait a second. For the last 4 years, you were supposed to be doing that. So how about a report card on on your school choice accomplishments for the last 4 years? Didn't happen.
Yeah, but schools, taxes, couple other things. Just put them all on the table, over the next 11 days.
And then so in this round, they're not even talking about it. Nobody wants to be education president. I'm looking here at the key priorities for the two. NPR posted Joe Biden and Donald Trump's key priorities for education. They posted 1, 2, 3, 4 for Biden, which is to make colleges, public colleges, and historically Black colleges and universities and minority-serving institutions tuition free for families making more than $125K. It's not a bad benefit.
Less than, right? Yeah.
120, less than 125K, you get free college. Make 2-year community colleges and training programs tuition free. I'm all for that one. Cancel $10,000 of every American student's debt and revise current loan repayment system. It's a little vague for me. 10K is like so small in comparison to what people owe.
And I want that retroactive too. If you already paid your debt, I want to.
How about we make a retroactive 400 years? Yeah. And his last one is this to establish universal PreK. Donald Trump has 2. Strengthen school choice policy. Now, I hate words like strengthen because you didn't tell me nothing. You spent the last 4 years supposedly doing something for school choice. And now you're telling me your new goal is to strengthen school choice policy. At what level? The federal level? There's nothing you can do really. Like nothing, because you already tried to do a few things and even conservatives were against you. So, and expand accessibility to charter schools, even though in this last term, he tried to block grant the money that helps you build new charter schools, which inevitably would lead to them having less money to expand charter schools. And then the second point on there is completely whack. The dumbest shit I've ever heard in my life. Promote patriotic education curriculum in schools. Like he's some damn Caesar, some czar. Like I'm going to decree that you all shall learn. Number one, that's not that.
I mean, what is that? But usually when people are talking about that kind of curriculum, they talk about like the default, which we have now, is Eurocentric, white supremacist. Erase everybody else's contributions and sufferings, and just focus on white American exceptionalism. That's what our children should learn.
BS. Sieg Heil BS is what it is. And the first people who should tell him that he is crazy are conservatives and libertarians who don't believe that the federal government should be doing anything like that to people. So if anyone has given him a free
have they been freaking out about that, or has it been muted?
This is the type of thing that I think separates conservatives from libertarians. Conservatives are basically just cucks for the culture war. They're just culture warriors. They act like they have principles, but really they're just as partisan to a particular form of authoritarianism as anybody else is. Libertarians are like, you should not be doing any of this from the top down, period. Right? It's not constitutional. It's not, but conservatives say that same thing. You should be not doing, as long as it's liberal stuff, you shouldn't be doing any of that from the top down. And then when it comes down to something they like, oh, wait, whoa, you mean we're going to get to say that 1776 is and the framers of the Constitution were amazing people and blah, blah, blah. Oh, well, then I guess everything else is out the window. Continue, young man. Do your thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, like, with Biden, and I support, this idea of, the colleges and tuition and all of that. But I think, and pre-K, right? But it's like the crux is in the middle, of that. Like, we know that there's research that even kids who are well prepared, and when they enter, kindergarten and first and second grade, they fall behind. And the more prepared they are, the wider the gap ends up being, right? Like, that trajectory doesn't stay the same. And then, the percentage of, I've worked in, some of the neighborhoods I've worked in schools, maybe 6%, 8% of the adults had college degrees. And the reason for that was the K-12 system, like that, they weren't getting that same trajectory, right? And so to not have any priority for that, like, everything has to be aligned. I think that's so much what's wrong with the country. There's so much misalignment with, okay, here's my goal. What are you going to do? How do you backwards design that? They're like, oh, well, we're going to skip everything and we're going to go to pre-K. I think that's a huge miss, colossal miss.
Well, I think pre-K becomes a big argument for folks. I'm for it. I've had arguments for locally with conservatives and with liberals on the issue, and it always seemed to me to be an interesting and messy one, because there's so many different ways for me to approach it. It's an economic program. If you have nowhere to put your kids in that area of their life, like when they're 1, 2, 3, 4 years old, it changes on what you can earn in life. It changes what you can do. And right now, daycare is like the shoddiest of alternatives to what you should really have. Like, to have structured environments with personnel who are trained versus like this shoddy ass daycare system that we have in the United States, I just think gives different kids different starts. But then, listen, I'm a libertarian. I'm going to bump into all kinds of libertarian friends and conservative friends who are going to start talking to me about, government programs and takeover and all that. And of course, I'm agreeable to a lot of that. So, but let's get to the issue at hand, reparations, because that's what I want to talk about today. And it's a messy topic. So I want to talk about it in two ways. I want to talk about reparations just in general, writ large. We'll start there. And then I want to get to this thing that I consider to be more important to what we care about every day, which is educational reparations. Here's my short frame on it. My short frame is Glenn Loury, noted conservative, recently said that reparations is about, now I want to get it right the way that he said it. He said it's about taking money from people who never owned slaves and giving it to people who have never been slaves. Why would we do that? Right? This is Glenn Loury's, black conservative, conservative who happens to be black rhetoric. Because there's a difference. Let me keep saying this, people, every time you hear me say this, there's a difference between a black conservative and a conservative who happens to be black. Glenn Loury is the second. He's a conservative first who happens to be black, and the black part is definitely subordinate to the conservative part. But that's his take on reparations. And let's just start with that. We'll get to education reparations, which I'm basing on Gloria Lansing Billings' concept that there's an education debt. And we should talk about what that debt is. And if the debt is real, the education debt is real, what should be the reparations to repay that education debt? So let's come to that second, but let's start with the first one. What do you say to Loury, who says, man, this stuff around reparations that all these BLM people are fighting for is really just about taking money from people who never owned slaves and giving it to people who've never been slaves?
Yeah, so Loury's thinking around this issue is constricted and severely faulty. When a lot of times when people are thinking about, tilting the scales of justice back to being, balanced, or, we're talking about equity and things like that. It's not, you can't get wrapped up with the individual. What we're talking about is faulty institutions, racist institutions that have been going on. And he can't, with his eyes halfway open, look at the institutions for the past 400 years and say that they are not racist, that they are not faulty, that they were not engineered to specifically privilege the few and oppress the many. Like that's fact. And their own researchers, his team, his squad can acknowledge that when they look simply at the facts and the data. Where the issue comes in is like, should it be addressed? Should it be fixed or not? Loury is someone who doesn't want to fix it, obviously, because what he's doing is trying to separate the institutions and just saying the individuals. You have to remember, these institutions are also, individuals play a role in it because they can be complicit. They can be the, unconscious tapper of the button and greasing the wheels of these said institutions to continue to perpetuate the racist practices and policies that were, engineered from the very beginning. So, Lowry he's wrong, dead wrong. And what he has to understand is that there is a privileged class that many of them can look at institutions for supporting them in the past and continue to prop them up. And what we're saying for reparations is that has to be fixed. That has to be addressed. The system itself has to be addressed, in a way that you can do that is through reparations to for the families and the descendants of the aggrieved.
He asked a lot of questions around, well, how would it work? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like one of the famous, especially with Black conservatives, like, what does that look like? Are we going to give Lakeisha a check and just let her go do Lakeisha stuff? Blah, blah, blah. It's like the dumbest shit I've ever heard. But so, I'll throw that question to you. I mean, what does it look like? Yeah, okay, so we decide something should be repaid. Okay, now what? Who gets the money? How do you get the money to them?
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of different models, right? Like, yes, some of it is like everybody gets a percentage. They get some part of it. Like when they were trying to get this the stimulus packages to the automobile industries and to the banks, and nobody's worried about how do we get the money there? Like money will flow when we want to get money overseas to countries and stuff like that. Look. They don't say oh, how do we get money to the Saudi Arabia kings, because they were complicit in 9/11 and they do a lot of problematic stuff, but there's no question in. So we can get money where we want. It's always back to the idea of the will, right? And the mindset. Everything's under there. So, I'm trying to figure out, how do I get to the gym, right? Like when you don't want to, you find all kind of obstacles. When you want to, there are no barriers. You make it happen. And so that's one. So yes, some models say get a percentage of the funds to, individuals, but make more of it designed to address the institutional issues that are happening, whether it's the bank loans, whether it's the schools, whether it's the conditions in communities that people are suffering from, bogged down from. Then that's what it could look like. What does it look like for the generation? Not just that individual, but her children, his children. What can be set up for that? So when we talk about this wealth gap, that's what a lot of folks are looking at, the reparations that could be, as you said, educational debt from GLB. Everything goes back to Philly, right? GLB in the house, right? So educational debt or the wealth gap. You look at that New York Times article where a couple of years ago, where it showed even wealthy Black boys end up poor. Poor white kids can end up wealthy, right? And that there's something going on. So even if these Black boys grew up in neighborhoods and schools that were looked at as as good, as solid, what's happening? There's something going on, at the national level as well as the institutional level that's causing these rifts that continue. They just widen and widen.
The thing that happens when you get into discussions like this is you always talk about an individual and you talk about the collective, and whichever one you choose, there could be a benefit to talking about the individual or the collective, or there could be a downfall to talking about the individual or the collective. Something like reparations, when you start talking about, do you give Lakeisha a check? First of all, there's so much inherently wrong with that way of looking at it. It helps you bypass the idea that the wealth gap is a collective gap, and all the gaps were collective gaps, and the miscapitalization and the maladapted and maldistributed resources of power were collective. The problem you're trying to solve was a collective problem. years ago. So Dr. Claude Anderson, when he talks about these things, says that the very first Constitution of the United States, the Constitution as we know it, was America's very first affirmative action plan. And it was a plan designed exclusively for whites from shithole countries who came to the United States and actually wanted to set up something that they legally created specifically for whites to distribute land, resources, minerals, businesses, rights, privileges, everything. All of it was, when they talk in the big sweeping language of we the people and all men are created equal or blah, 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 they very clearly were creating a white system of economic distribution, like things that you get to have this. You come here from somewhere else. The second Constitution, he says, second Constitution of the United States were the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And in that period called Reconstruction, where America was going to take a first swipe at reconstructing the original white affirmative action plan called the Constitution, that when they took that second swipe, the Supreme Court helped them to strike down anything that was specific to the remedies of justice for Black people, specifically indigenous Black people native born to the United States. It suddenly became, okay, we can't reconstruct in that way. We can't do specific justice for this specific group that we specifically cut out of the benefits and fruits of their labor and the benefits and the roots of like ownership within the United States system. We have to make these things more colorblind and neutral for all and whatnot. And that ended Reconstruction. And it's never been corrected. It's never been corrected. So when we talk today about, 38% of Black people being beneath the poverty line, 34% of Black kids being beneath the poverty line, 51% of prison population being Black men, 6 Blacks for every 1 that are dying during COVID. These are all things that Dr. Claude Anderson talks about. When you talk about those things, you can't talk about them in the vacuum of we don't know what happened before today. Like before the day that these statistics were instituted. We don't have Black banks. We don't have Black hospitals. We don't have Black schools. We don't have the Black means of production in the United States. As a capitalist country, if you don't have capital, if you are decapitalized, there is no clearer way to be a ceaseless slave. The conditions of your slavery may change. The benefits and rewards and where you live and the location of your slavery may change, but to be decapitalized in a capitalist system is the problem. There is no other problem. So all other problems evaporate. Until you fix that one, all other ones evaporate. You can tweak at the edges of anything, but if you're not getting to the idea that we're not capitalized, so reparations would, in economic terms and in education terms, might be a little bit different, but share a similar vein, which is you have to own stuff. You got to own stuff, whether it's educational or economic reparations. So let's switch to economic reparations, because I think the economic ones would get us into too many questions around, how do you do it and blah, blah, blah. Dr. Claude would just basically tell you need to set up an official office of the Black capitalization, and it needs to be a cabinet level office. It needs to set up regional offices where Black people are congregated, and any industry where Black people are the dominant consumer of that industry should be owned by Black people and Black businesses, right? He also would tell you things like the United States should do a major infrastructural project that ends up with Black people as the sole beneficiary. Like Indians, American Indians have casinos and have land. You can't get away from getting back to, you actually need something like that. He would say that there should be a high-speed rail system that connects the entire American South, and that you should be able to get on a bullet train going anywhere in the South and get from places. It would be an economic boom, but every inch of that should be owned by Black people as a capitalization project. The United States should create a capitalization project that is going to have ongoing benefits that, like the Indians with casinos and reservations, that Black people would own. All right. So with education reparations, what would that look like for education reparations to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you start off with, those words, life, liberty, and happiness. And it's hard to experience life at its fullest. It's hard to have full liberty, which I often tie to decision making and self-determination, and forget the pursuit of happiness. If you don't have a high quality education, and as we know, too many of our schools and are not high quality. The education our children are receiving, I can't even say education with a straight face for some of the stuff that our kids are subjected to. Like that's, as Malcolm said, it's not the American dream, it's the American nightmare. And that nightmare starts in schools at a very early age, and it just continues. And so for me, one huge part of it is the educational system, and that it is should be revamped and put in the Black child at the center. I think it means that, back to what you said, like land grants, it should be almost school grants, right? Where communities are able to build schools and have the money, not like, oh, here's the money and this is, you got to budget this and you got to decide whether you're going to have a social worker or a playground for a first grader. Like, nah, they design it. We have that vision for it. And then the money gets allocated for whatever it costs. Like, for me, that's part of the reparations. Not saying, oh, yeah, you can have quality education and we're going to give you, X amount. You look at the conditions of various schools and districts, you see that's not going to work. And I would say, like, quality education throughout your life. So if I want to get 5 PhDs, they're free. Right. Because that's part of the reparations. Like, whatever I can do to move myself forward educationally, that there's, no barriers whatsoever financially, and that we have the institution, just like we have these HBCUs that kind of, a lot of them started after, Reconstruction or during Reconstruction afterwards. Right. Like, we should have that same type of thing, but multiplied by hundreds, Black institutions, that are grounded in what will make Black children successful. Because remember, great education, it's not just good for that child that's sitting there, is good for the grandchildren of that child. And that cycle just continually perpetuates. So quality education is, and scholarships and the opportunities and everything about education, right? Like, not just, oh, the school is there, but your books, you're going to college, that you get the books, you get a travel stipend so that you can get home and you don't have to stress about that, right? That library, all of the educational ecosystem, right? Like that library that's been closed for over a decade across the street from Shoemaker, where I was the principal, like that would not be closed. Matter of fact, it would be reopened, reimagined, and built to be this brilliant place for Black children and adults to convene. So, like, for me, it would be a whole lot of Black-led, Black-founded, sustained schools. Because right now we look at HBCUs and we see how they get underfunded, they get marginalized, they get a fraction of the funding, the endowments that white institutions do, because it's still defaulted to to whiteness.
Well, I mean, it seems like that would be a good place to start. HBCUs 100% free.
100% free for HBCUs, and I would even add on, if we look at like just education, we look at the impact of Black teachers, then I would have like a Black teacher education fund, right? Like that also specifically supports Black teachers, right? So right now, I hope Ray is listening. Right now, at the Center for Black Educated Development, we're trying to raise money for a Black teacher scholarship, like this endowment, like, where the principal stays, and that we're able to help support youth who want to become teachers and say, like, hey, teach for 5 years and, everything's, you could do it from loan repayment, or upfront. So they have to even go through all the hassle of, securing a loan. Right. So those kind of things. But a Black teacher education scholarship is a part of it. And that should be something that the federal government supports. Right. And forever. Right. Like forever.
As an ongoing benefit. So so first of all, I just want to say this, like, for everyone who says, well, Biden isn't offering anything that, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I mean, his step towards free HBCUs is a step in the direction that we want to go. Like, if we want HBCUs not to have to beg every couple of years or whatnot, it should be a permanent benefit. The HBCUs actually turn out the majority of Black college educated people, and it should be, and everybody has an interest in that happening. So that should be one. And then everything you just hit on, I heard you say, like, something that made me think about textbooks. And And it just got me to thinking, everything that comes within that industry where you have like HBCU should be Black owned. So the textbook companies that provide textbooks to those schools, and the customer service centers that handle those, like the Pearson of Black education, should be Black. Yeah, the whole thing, the whole ecosystem. And now you're talking about something. Now you're talking about not education reform, but you're talking about educational capital. And educational capital should be beefing up HBCUs. All the associated businesses that support a university should be Black. And then you get into K-12 education. Now, this is where we're going to have a fight, Sharif, because K-12 education is different. HBCUs are both public and private. When you get to K-12 education, now you're talking about white property, because the teachers unions see teaching jobs as property. And if they literally are property, guess who owns that property? White women. So now you come along and you're saying, no, we need some reparations here. We need Black ownership. We need educational capital. We need Black people to own the means of production in education, which means some of y'all are not going to have jobs anymore. Sorry, hate to tell you. So how are you going to deal with K-12 in this reparations thing?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to the HBCUs. Like I do think, and I love how you're connecting the dots between, it's not just the education, the professor or the institution of learning. We're talking about everyone who benefits from the food industry to the textbooks industry, to the land maintenance, all of that, the masonry, all of that should be, funneling towards one particular community that's been specifically and directly targeted to be marginalized and exterminated in so many different ways. And so with K-12, we know from experience, just like Teach Forever 54 said, free education itself does not mean anything, for us, because there's not quality. And so I think that's where we ensure that we have community groups. We have, the HBCUs. I think HBCUs should be involved in the K-12 process. I think HBCUs should look at it the long term. So when we develop freedom schools, we're connecting to the HBCUs and saying, hey, this student is going to eventually be there. So that means now you should be here. And so that cycle has to be, that circle has to be looked, that community output. We want them to be successful in college, then they also have to have a landing. So we should almost have like these HBCUs for pre-K to 12 as well, right? Where it's historically Black, it becomes historically Black. And it's not just, it's free and you have it in your neighborhood, but it is specifically designed to ensure success, like that trajectory. When the researchers, when the practitioners, when the families look at it, they say, oh, this is a trajectory. This is a blueprint for success. I can see the trajectory of a pre-K student all the way through their doctoral program. And it starts in that K to 12, right? And so it's not just, it's free and just go to the school down the street. Nah. These are things that are, again, back to that land issue, back to the, and whether it's, to me, as you talk about often, it's the learning, so whether it's public, private, whatever, that is the institution for learning, and that students can go there for free, but for quality, and the quality precedes the free, like that's where the focus is.
Now you do this, you still have a fight, like everything you're saying right now, you still have a fight. Because there are people that are vested in the current system being the way that it is right now. When you talk about reparations, people on the right often are the first ones who are going to come to you, and they're going to, it's really going to get under their skin. Like, the idea of reparations, the idea of America admitting that it has this original sin or this bad past or anything like this. For some reason, it's the most triggering thing to right-wing liberty lovers. For some reason, it's like the
weird,
one thing,
man. It's a psychosis, because they celebrate that same thing. When you talk about the gold rush, white folks be like, "Oh yeah, the gold rush, that was amazing. That was like, great. What happened in there?" You talk about, manifest destiny and these folks who were just going across the land. Like, who was there? Like, who was barred from going? Like, all of that, and who did they take with them in shackles? Right? Like, so they remember history as this glorious thing, and they just like put blinders on for the how they trampled everybody else in its wake. And to me, that's the psychosis of it, the willing psychosis, because they tap into it. We talked about Matrix last week. Like they are willfully saying, oh yeah, I want that pill that allows me to ignore everybody that I've crushed to get to where I am.
Well, I mean, history is just a movie. History is just a movie, and everybody has their own theater. It's called your brain. So your brain is a movie theater, and everybody has it. So when we talk about history, your movie starts playing. My movie plays in my theater. Your movie plays in your theater, and they are different movies. I guarantee you, my friend. And those movies, the script for those movies, we have different authors of our scripts. And Experience is one of our scripts, is one of our screenwriters, I should say. Experience is one of our screenwriters. The sum total of all of the information we've ever taken in through reading and study is also one of our screenwriters. And our own personal kind of cultural affirmations is a third screenwriter. So when we start talking about the past, let's just say past in history, boom, the movie goes on. So I have my movie, you have your movie. You know, you're some white conservative dude somewhere. I'm an urban black guy here, or a urban academic there, or a Latino worker over here, or academic in that school, or I could, whoever I am, wherever I'm socially, economically, or culturally located, my movie goes on. It's going to be different than yours. Mine might even have subtitles and yours doesn't. Mine might even be in a different language than yours and whatnot. And the reason that someone is triggering is because it's triggered, I think, especially if you're that, you know, where Mel Gibson's The Patriot, which is a great movie for anybody watching, by the way, it's like one of the best ever. But if that is your movie, for instance, Mel Gibson's The Patriot is your movie, which is amazing as a movie, you know,
entertaining, if not so historically factual, but they're entertaining nonetheless.
Entertaining, very entertaining. I love the stuff with the axe. But anyways, if that's your movie, and I'm coming along with this other stuff, it's like someone sitting in your movie theater talking while your movie's on, right?
There's certain theaters I no longer go to because of that.
Because it's triggering. So that might explain the great triggering when we start talking about reparations. That's like somebody talking in The Patriot. You're watching The Patriot, and here comes somebody talking about reparations in the front row, and you're like, "Will you get out of here?" That's why they don't want to hear it. They don't want to talk to you about that because you're interrupting their movie. Right. But on the left, this is where I was going with that. On the left, though, it's not like it's all hunky dory with the left isn't all about reparations. This is, which is interesting. Bernie Sanders wasn't about reparations. Mr. I'm the second coming of like the great white hope for all of Black humanity. You know, if you just sign on to my socialism, we'll all be good. And so many of our people bought that shit and just drank it down like Kool-Aid, that this particular Jim Jones was better than a different Jim Jones. But he's not for reparations, which is interesting. He is for unions, and he is for power as the way that it's aligned right now. When you start talking about things like school, when you talk about school choice and charter schools and school anything, because unions are his religion, and because unions are white run, white controlled, or whatnot, he can't venture into anything like reparations, anything which is going to take away white power and white property from the union collective that he supports and that he's supported by. It's a very weird thing on the left. It's a very, like, when racial politics and union politics collide, guess who's going to win? Guess who's going to win? And you know, tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like something like educational capital, our main kind of barrier is on the left. It is not on the right. So when we talk about reparations writ large, the right's not in love with it at all. When we talk about educational reparations, the left isn't with it at all. So we're kind of cut out of the economic and educational side then. Now we're screwed. Where do we go, Sharif?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why, you know, the battle is on all fronts. And, you know, as again, to quote Malcolm, you know, like Black people are the political football, you know, between these two groups of people. And they're vying for power, and they're figuring out like, all right, how do we use this group of folks? We don't want equality for them. We don't want justice for them, but we do want to use them as often and as deeply as we can to further our own gain. And that's why this has to be something that we continue to fight for, that we look at all sides, across all sides, and get a package that furthers our own interests, because at the end of the day, this stuff is about race, it's about privilege, and it's about power. And if any of our plans does not address all three, then we're going to be the losers. If we're negotiating with unions, we should be talking about Black power. If we're talking to policymakers, we should be talking about the Black power. That piece, that when Stokely Carmichael made it more public, but people had already had been talking about Black power before he made it very public and fiery, which got more people's attention who hadn't really paid attention to it before. Like that piece is absolutely crucial. And any negotiations that does not talk about centering Black power, and for us, a strong group of youth who are able to live their fullest life without the oppression, that's part of the power base, right? But we know education itself isn't alone. That's what I mean by the power and facing institutions. The economists will say that New York Times articles will show research that says college educated white folks have a 7 times greater wealth than college educated Black folks. So it's not just that, it's not just the free education or the quality. It has to be centered on something, and our future and our power, our self-determination, all of that has to be part of the mix. If not,
okay, so I have 2 things for you. One is going to be totally predictable when we get there. You're going to know exactly why when I say it, because it's going to be the recurring theme of you and I. And the one place where you and I are going to disagree on these things, we're going to get there in a second. But let's just start with the left, the educational left, liberals, progressives, faux-gressives. The people on the left in education will say, we are fighting for community schools. That means you get to own it, right? That means it's not like somebody on high. It means it's a community school. We're fighting for democratically run schools, which means you have a school board where you have a say and you have power. These other people are offering you these schools and these opportunities that are not democratic because they're not like, they don't have elected leadership. They're not community schools, and they don't have all the wraparound services because they're either private or quasi-private or whatever. So what's wrong with that deal? Like they're saying, listen, we're fighting for you right now. We're fighting for you to have community-based schools.
Yeah, what they're fighting. It's almost like Dracula saying he's fighting for you. He's sucking the blood out of you and fighting you at the same time, and saying like, oh, this is going to be better for you. Listen, I know community schools, high schools that have had health clinics attached to them for decades, right? And this is what they want to sell you about, like, hey, forget reading, forget college, being prepared to go to post-secondary education. All you really need is to get your teeth fixed. And everything else, you can, as you get that dental surgery and you get the what's that, Novocaine, and like that, we'll give you that, as opposed to holding ourselves accountable. Because all of what you mentioned, what's missing is the dirty A word. Like, I will give you things, but I'm not accountable for learning. I will give you every wraparound service that you want, but if I can remove myself from the accountability of you achieving, of students actually graduating college and career ready, then it's all for naught, right? And I think too often, because when someone is starved for all the resources, sometimes a little bit of resource looks like, oh, that's a glimmer of light. But sometimes that light coming down the tunnel, it ain't the other side. It's an oncoming train. And too often these liberals have positioned themselves as the oncoming train, as we're looking at it and being blinded by the light and thinking that this is out of graciousness. It's just another form of oppression too often, because it's not benefiting student outcomes and not benefiting the grandchildren of the students that they currently have in there.
It feels like it's a more bad form of oppression Which ironically, like, listen, the right is offering you something better on this. I mean, I'm just going to be real. Like, if you're to the right of center, when it comes to the education part of reparations, the teams flip in terms of their damage or what they're offering, like how good it is. And that's why I didn't want Joe Biden to wade too much into education last night, because I think Donald Trump actually, on the education thing, if he were to get his act together and actually understand what he's even talking about when he says school choice, is a better deal. Yeah, I know it's impossible. It's like, if listen, he's got whatever the opposite of the Midas touch is, he's got that. So so touching school choice for him is a mixed blessing, because you don't want school choice to go the way of Trump Steaks, Trump Airlines, Trump University, Trump shirts, Trump everything. Keep going. You don't want school choice to go that way. So you don't want the dude with the opposite of the Midas touch touching it. But still, the right generally has a better deal for you when it comes to educational freedom. Like, if you want to be free, if you want to own your own stuff and do your own thing educationally or whatnot, the Democrats are actually the ones when it comes to that form of reparations that are problematic.
Yeah, but when I look at it, I look at like which group can be, challenged and held accountable differently. I would still say, as you said, the opposite of Midas. Like he's so far from any sense of what like educational justice could possibly look like. So it's one of the it's that saying that the devil may say something, but he's still a liar. He may say something you agree with. He may say like, "Hey, today's Friday," and you're like, "Hey, look,
it is Friday.
Something good. It is Friday.
Yeah, it is
but
Friday.
He's a liar. He's a liar,
yeah.
right? And so like that can't be forgotten. I think what Black folks have to do is keep their eyes open as they're at the negotiation tables. We're still at war, right? And so we can't look at it like, oh, Democrats won, so now we're not at war. Like, no, like your grandchild demands that you stay century ready, you stay soldier ready, that you stay fighting for it, and not 1 second put the banner down because you think that the Democrats won. Like Malcolm and many others warned us. Like, what do you mean by the good massa? Like, what do you mean by the good plantation? What do you mean by the foxy white liberals who are promising you things, but really saying you're a political football to me? Right. And so that means what that means is, back to, and Derek Bell, I think it will come up in every conversation we ever have, about these type of issues is, what are you doing next? Because the switcheroo is going to come. It's coming. Right. Malcolm,
I think Malcolm X, Malcolm, I think even said, though, that the liberals were the bigger problem.
Because that's who gets tricked. That's who we get.
That who tricks you.
Lulled to sleep. Yeah. That's who lulls us to sleep. Yeah. That's who we feel most comfortable with. And so he wasn't like endorsing. He was like, listen, both of them, your eyes got to be wide open. What do you say about the Cadillac? Racism comes a new model every year, just like a Cadillac. Right. And so
if we're let's just quickly, though, I do think he was saying that he had more common ground with the white conservative in some instrumental ways. Like integration was one of those things where he was like, they're honest and they got the right idea. And we should be doing that for our people too. Right. Like when it came to segregation, like, he's the one who said only a dummy turns over his kid to his enemy to get educated or whatnot. So when things like integration came up, he was definitely more siding with conservatives, not because he thought that, that they were good people or anything like that, but just because he thought that Black people weren't going to have any power unless they did the same thing. Right. Unless they built their own stuff. So he's like, yeah, I'm going to side with the conservatives on this one because it makes us more powerful.
But that's the thing. Like, I wouldn't call it siding with them. Because when your mindset is so different, then it's hard to be on someone's side, even if you see tactics and strategies that, back to that interest convergence idea, right? Like that you may see, like, what, I can further my own interests if I use that tactic and build our own institutions. They don't want you here anyway. Right. And so let me tell the liberals, give me the funding so that I can create my own institutions, because I'm going to lose in either one of it. If either of y'all have the power over my children and grandchildren, I am the loser. And if I do that willfully,
if I look at it as those two people are coming to you with a plan proposal, and they're saying, let me give you a presentation. And my main question in both of the white presentations is, what do I get out of it? And what do I own when you're done with your presentation?
What do I own?
If I'm looking at a white liberal and a white conservative on education, and they get done with their presentation, and I ask the question, what do I get out of it and what do I own? I'm clearly looking at the conservatives saying, where's the contract? Let's sign up, right? Because it doesn't matter whether I like you or dislike you or whatnot. I'm about Black interests, and interests don't make me to like you. I don't need to like you or hate you or whatnot. As a matter of fact, I will hate you more if I agree with you on a bunch of stuff and you're denying me the one thing that I consider to be the lifeblood of my children, right? Like, listen, we gave you all these donuts and we gave you endless kind of like cards to Cinnabon, so you could gift cards to Cinnabon, and we got you a Best Buy credit card, and we got you all this stuff. We're going to kill your child's brain. But look at all the benefit that you're going to get for us having just this one thing. It's just a small thing. It's not a big thing, man. It's just, I mean, God damn, what else do I have to do for you? I'm giving you welfare, and I'm giving you like gift certificates, and I'm giving you all kinds of other vouchers in life. But, can you just cut me some slack, Jack? I don't just, there's just one small one. Your kids are going to be ignorant, not know how to read, and never like own anything or be able to get a job or own a house or like live a life or blah, blah. But I mean, we're going to give you a bunch of goodies for that. That makes me hate you more. Right. Like another guy is like, listen, I'm not with none of that other stuff that the left is for. I don't want to give you nothing. But if you want to make some stuff on your own, I want to give you a driver's license to make some stuff on your own. And I want to give you the like little voucher that'll help you make that happen. Now, wait a second now. Why does that not sound like such a bad deal all of a sudden to me?
Yeah. I mean, my thing is you end up with too many Lowrys. Is that the guy's name that we started the show with?
Glenn Lowry. Yeah. I think,
so
he's the Uncle Ruckus of YouTube right now.
I mean, that's my concern. We got all these, Silken Diamond and Uncle Ruckus and hopping Bobs, right? Like we got these hopping Bobs who would be like, listen, because they want to sell the whole pack. What I would do is like, I want that piece. I want that because I'm looking for a third way. I'm looking for a third option, right? Like I'm looking for our independent
or a sole option.
Exactly. Like and I agree. Option, and like what Michael Kort said, a couple months ago when he came on the show, he said he's a pragmatic revolutionary, which means he knows like, hey, I'm going to take that part and I'm going to use it and to further our interests. And then no, it's not going to be perfect. So don't be coming at me talking about like, oh, you did it. Like you ain't got no perfect plan either, but at least I'm building a house, right? Like, and I got that brick from there and that brick from there and I melded them together. And now I'm doing other things while you're sitting on the lawn chair, smoking a blunt, talking about all that. Like I'm about the work. Right. And so if we're pragmatic revolutionaries, then we're going to, understand that there's no escape. That there's a new Cadillac version of racism is coming out in 2021, but that we are still building for our grandchildren success, that we are still pulling together pieces of power, and that's what we're using to further our interests. Right. So no, absolutely. What is it? Always looking with our eyes wide open, at the buffet table, if we even make it to that buffet table, sometimes we outside of the house looking through the window at the buffet table. But if we get any piece of getting there and snatching something, we got to do it.
Darren Beck says that he loves the concept of pragmatic revolution, which I do too, a lot. I will say, when I said earlier, the difference between a Black conservative and a conservative who happens to be Black. Conservatism is about always keeping in mind the things that have made you great and have worked the most for you. So the systems and the ways of life and the ways of thinking and the faith principles, the things that have always pulled you out, have always been clutch, the things that have saved you and you survived, you should continuously be building those into a pile, a heritage pile. You should consistently be feeding that heritage pile. All the things that work and all the things that don't should burn away. And then you should conserve that pile. And that makes you a conservative. Now, if you are a Black conservative, you should be looking specifically at the heritage pile of things that have worked for Black people to make us free and to keep us alive. And to keep that should be what you're conserving. Your garden is the heritage garden. It is the things of which that have specifically for Black people worked to keep us alive. Family, strong bonds, collectivism, maybe the Kwanzaa principles. All of those things would be the things a Black conservative would be concerned with, saying, we must not ever let these go. This is our heritage pile. This is the thing that when you put it all together, that we must never forget, lose, whatever. That's a Black conservative. A conservative who happens to be Black does the exact same thing, but his pile is white. So the heritage pile that he actually is worshiping is actually the common white pile. And he's still a conservative because he wants to conserve it. He wants to conserve their pile. That's the difference between a Black conservative and a conservative who happens to be Black. So Lowry is actually worshiping the white pile. But I can't get out of this without saying this is where we were going to disagree. So two things I want to do quickly. I want to say the thing that I think we're going to disagree on, and you're going to give me a hard time about this quickly.
I thought it was that. What else?
Nope.
Okay.
No, that was gentle. And then the second thing that I want to do, I want to wrap on us saying, like, what are the 4 or 5 things? If we were going to have educational reparations, what are the few things? People in the comments, excuse me, and people watching, could you put in the comments the things that if we were to demand educational reparations, could you put into the comments the things that you think would have to be in that plan? Like the thing that we would demand. What would you put in something that was trying to get us educational capital restored that we would own? What would you put in that? So I'm going to ask you that last, Sharif. But the quick thing that I'm going to say to you that I think is going to be disagreeable to you is this. 90% of our own oppression is our own making right now. We are actually feeding our own oppression because 90% of the power that we do have, we're not using. And when it comes to something like education, we can have it in 2 directions. What the man is doing to me, what is being done to me. I'm a passive actor in the debate, in the discussion. I posit to you that if tomorrow every Black person in America decided to be uber responsible for everything that happens, we wouldn't need anything that's being given to us. Not in the world fund of information that we have now, not to the free access to information that we've had now being bigger than it's ever been in the history of the world, not with these things called libraries and networks and a several trillion, $1.3 trillion budget for Black people. Dr. Claude Anderson says we impose poverty on our own people. 96 cents of the Black dollar goes right out of our hand into non-Black hands right away. And there's nobody putting a gun to our head making that happen. Right? 96 cents of every dollar goes straight through our fingers and goes into somebody else's hands, which is where Dr. Claude Anderson locates all the power, right? All the power that we could possibly have. So if we were doing everything to tutor our own kids, to make sure that they're reading at night, to make sure that they had books or whatnot. Now, this is where it starts sounding like the conservative stuff that people on the left hate and Black folks hate hearing. But the majority of this conversation goes away if we're doing all that we possibly can for our own kids without even the system changing at all. System could be exactly the way that it is right now. But with us every single day doing everything we possibly can for our own children, the majority of the problem goes away. What say you?
I would say it simplifies it too much, right? Like I think, yes, collective, I believe in collective responsibility. I believe in the use of Nguza Saba. Like those were our principles growing up at school. And I'll forever, side with that alignment, right? This collective work and responsibility, this accountability to each other. But even with us doing everything that we're supposed to do, I just can't ignore the gun pointed to my head in so many, whether it's economic oppression, educational oppression, the courtrooms, oppressive tactics, like all of that is a gun pointing to our head. So even if I'm doing everything, I'm like, doing this. I got my suit. I got this. I'm doing that. I'm taking care of my kid. All of that. I'm doing all of that in the face of a barrel pointed to my head, because that's what the racism looks like. When we talk about doing for selves, we see Black farmers were wiped out. Like, so we can say like, oh yeah, buy produce from Black farmers. But then when you look at the policies that were implemented to eradicate such a significant number of Black farmers, the trickery and the thievery that was used to snatch land and do other things, right? Like that's something else, especially when I'm looking at the other farmers, the white farmers, and, like how that welfare system works out, because, how they're, asked to produce things that, that's harmful or isn't useful, right? Like, so I can't ignore that. I can't ignore, like, this parent who's trying everything they can to educate their child, and then, they end up cross some imaginary line to do that, to show some self-determination and saying, you know what, that is a hellhole, that's the black hole, and I'm going over there, and she ends up in jail, or fined or harassed, right? Because every time you look at the people who are doing those things and how they are just constantly, smacked down. So, but I do agree, like, this collective work, I just wrote a piece on Blavity around this, even this idea of nonprofits. Carmita Seman says, like, hey, we're talking about bounding back from COVID. One, the safety net for the default, the Eurocentric, the white institution, the white nonprofits, the white, all these institutions, they got a safety net that's almost on par with the precipice, so they ain't falling down. Our safety net is down in the canyon. And what she posits is like, hey, we don't need a safety net that's all the way in the canyon while your safety net is all the way, miles high. We need a trampoline to get back. That reparation, we need that trampoline to get back and tilt the scales of justice back. Because if you just say, oh, just do everything you can in this oppressive state, in this quicksand, that's what it feels like to me. That there's like, do all you can as a community in this on this board, on this platform that's grounded on quicksand or ungrounded by the quicksand. And then the other group, they're doing everything they can, and they got fertile ground that they're building on. So yes, collective responsibility. Yes, we have to do better. We have to be responsible for our community. Like, that's what we preach to our youth. Like, you are responsible for your community. You can lift as you climb, but I'm not for 1 second ignoring that this barrel is facing us.
I think that's where it is. Where you and I are always going to land on this thing is it's a both and. Yeah, we have to do both at the same time. And my point always in pointing the one out is going to be the one is always going to get more attention when it's the external threat. The internal mandate for collective behavior and collectivist action and our own commitment to doing revolutionary things like teaching our own children to read, feeding our own children, raising our own children, not expecting others to do for our children what they have never in history shown that they have any idea of doing, right? That's never going to go away, and it's never going to get a lot of attention, because the sexier thing always is when there's, and this isn't about Black people, this is about all people. Like, you have a president right now who lives on pointing the blame everywhere but himself. That is like that is a thing. Like, that's a tick. No, I don't think anybody likes accountability. So no one likes to be called out on you're not doing what you should be doing, even when you're not doing what you should be doing. So it's a both and to me, but I think the one that is clearly within our power to change immediately tonight, like right now, tonight, is to say, let me enumerate all of the things that I'm going to I'm going to be militant about. What are the things I should be militant about? Like, if someone would write a book for me on the militant parent, like if I was going to be militant, I'm going to make sure my kids don't read no nonsense. I'm going to make sure that, like, when it comes down to things about versions of history or whatnot, I'm going to make that's going to be corrected in my own household, like whatever. Well, that list could keep going. Like that militant list of what a militant parent would do with their own kid. I hear it all the time. Like, even some of the people in our comments, when they tell me what they're doing with their kids or what they allow and don't allow, I hear echoes of it. It should be in one book. And that book should be given to everybody when they have a baby. The first day. Like, these are all the things that Black people have already figured out that they're going to monitor with their kids
and going to conserve and be militant about it. Like, listen, you too, both of us growing up in that type of household, listen, is the benefits. And I also see where I'm less militant about things in my child rearing, like where I can already see the mistake that I made, with my own children. I was just like, you know what? I should have been more militant about that, like my parents and grandparents.
Now you preaching to the choir on that one, bro.
Like I'm just like, I like it, that I think, what it goes back to is like our collective mindset. And I know we got to wrap up, but I love that movie analogy where a movie is inside our own heads and stuff. And I think, that's one of the places that's been hijacked, the most, right? The brainwashing, the negative racial identity, the negative outlook of our own communities and our own self-efficacy, right? When we feel like we're impotent in problem solving and working together, like that's a big part of it, and I think we also we can't ignore as part of our movie that, or the scolding, as you say, there are a lot of folks, yes, who will scold, but it's harder to, if that scolding comes out of love, like that grandfather that's not even related to me down the street. And he's like, "Oh, Mikey, you shouldn't be doing that. Like, stop throwing them rocks at that window, whatever." Like, right. That's a different type of scolding than somebody who hates me riding by red, blue lights flashing like, "Yo, nigga, get the hell out of," right. Like that's a different, it's about mindset. It's about love. And, when love is removed from it, and there's no space for that, then that's different, right? It's like the cops who, the people who support cops, like, "Oh, blue lives matter." Yeah. As a citizen, you should remain calm when they ride up on you and put a gun to your face. They don't have to remain calm before they shoot you, right? Like it's the one who's getting a salary and they're trained and all that. They don't have to remain calm. It's you as the citizen. So sometimes the scolding is like that, right? Like with the neck on, they be scolding us while their foot is on our neck and telling us, "Oh, be quiet, be still." Like, yo, maybe I can if you stop trying to kill me intellectually and physically, right? And so I appreciate it, man. That movie and our own movies and how that can hijack, how that we have to protect it and make sure it is informed in the most healthy ways is vital. And that's just one of the many things I'm taking from this conversation. And lastly, I would just say, the other folks, particularly the whether it's liberals or racists who think that, oh, the problem was grounded in race, but the solutions can never be, then that's my argument about, this whole anti-reparations. Like you acknowledge that everything that was done was based on racism, but none of the solutions have anything to do with race. We got to be colorblind in the solutions. That means you just blindfolded with the solution. You just fumbling, just making up stuff. But thanks again, man. I really appreciate it.
It has been great. And, a few minutes ago, Michelle Johnson said, "Rap, it's been an hour." And when she said that it had not been an hour, it had been like 55 minutes. So I just wanted to put that out there. We're like over by about 7 minutes right now. I did want to quickly ask you, like maybe your 2 to 3, 4 things. If we were to say, educational capital is our goal. 1954, we lost educational capital. We wiped out Black schools, Black teachers, Black principals, Black pedagogical knowledge, institutional knowledge that had been gained over many years. That was stolen from us under the ironic kind of banner of integration. And we turned our kids over to white school boards, white teachers, and white schools in many places. And then a new crop of white trained and white owned Black teachers and workforce. I just want to add that part. So our problem, if we want to go home, getting back to good, is rebuilding educational capital. If we want to go home, educational capital is the goal, not anything else that people are offering, not reform, not integration, not whatever. Capital. We're a capitalist country. What you own is everything. So educational capital is our thing. My couple of points is that is different than a reform agenda in that it must be indigenous owned. It must be culturally affirming. It must be self-determined at all times, meaning self-governed, self-rule, self-determined or whatnot. I liked your idea about a Black teacher fund. To me, it has to be infrastructural, meaning you have to give us the space so that we build our own. So HBCUs are a good start. Maybe we build down. We build from that down through all the way to pre-K or whatnot, and that be fully resourced and funded by the government that has an interest in repairing what had been breached and what had been damaged. So that's my pitch. What's yours?
Man, I believe in that same thing. I like earlier where you talk about the ecosystem is addressed, right? Like the HBCUs building down, but then all of the services that are within that, the curriculum writers, right? Like we have HBCUs, but we're using books crafted by the white companies that ignore
Right.
Black voices, that mute Black experiences. Then it's no good. It's no good. You might as well have radon coming up out of the basement of your house, right? You still gonna be poisoned. You gonna die, right? And so I think all of that is absolutely important. But Jawanza Kunjufu used to say, like, we live in a capitalistic society and we don't teach our children like what capitalism is and does, right? Like that's never in the conversation. And so this idea of owning our schools, being able to speak for ourselves, being able to have the self-determination to define ourselves, everything that can be done to do that, particularly in our schools, that's what's most important.
I think anybody listening to this and watching, you just mentioned another author that should be in the mix of things. I think people, the longer these conversations go on, the longer we stray into policy territories that lead us back into the colorblind remedies, and that at some point you need a palate cleanser to come back to what the actual goal is. So reading like what the authors that have come up in this discussion, you probably need to take a Black weekend as a Black thinking parent and actually just kind of cleanse your palate with all the stuff you should have remembered that you forgot. Again, go back to some of these texts, like Kill Them Before They Grow. Go back and read some of the Black homeschooling literature, read some of the, stuff around Black capital, some of the stuff like Booker T's, philosophies on owning, schools or whatnot. Maybe take a weekend of it to submerge yourself in it again, because the longer you get in these battles, the more bleach gets into your philosophies. And you start losing some of this. The goal isn't reform or integration or any of those things. So who might you add to that list? If I was somebody listening and I thought, I really want to go deep the other direction so that I get back to good again. Like, who are some of those folks?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely start off. One of my main weekends would be engrossed in Jawanza Kunjufu, several books, a lot of them tied to the conspiracy to destroy Black boys. I remember my mom, it was like almost, a PE world tour, where sometimes, groups of families from Philly would like follow his lectures around the country. Like, Mama, you went and saw. Yeah, but he's going to say it in another way, an additional way, and the same way you listen to Cool G rap over and over again, I'm going to listen to him over and over again, because you internalize things differently and you have added context that you're adding, to it. So I would probably start off with with that. And then, of course, W.B. Du Bois, The Education of Black People, which is a series of essays that kind of adds color to, what education is, why it's important, and what does it mean for Black people. Those are just two of many. There are so many sisters who've written, great books. The Dream Keepers.
Gloria Lanson Billings. The GLB, as you said earlier.
GLB from West Philly. Like, don't give me. I don't want to drop bars today, man. We got.
I actually would like. I'd say for people that want to read deep or just watch videos, you could do either. You can go into YouTube and pop in some that will quickly. Everybody we just named, but if you think about anything that Vanessa Siddle Walker ever wrote is gold. You need to go look at Vanessa Siddle Walker. Everything she's ever wrote, look at every one of her lectures and read any of it just to get your movie right. Because the movie that you're playing right now about Black education is all wrong. And it was given to you by somebody else. Yeah, it's hijacked. You're in somebody else's theater right now. And Vanessa Siddle Walker will help you get your theater straight. It's like a marquee movie. It's not like one of them phony little movies that Will Smith puts in between his good movies. Like, right?
No, we had an agreement. We're not coming for Philly folks.
It's one of the ones in between, like Wild Wild West. So Vanessa Siddle Walker for sure. I would say definitely Education in the South, Black Education in the South as a book. Our folks have done the book club on it or whatnot. I just want to tell more people about these things. They should be in your mix, but you don't have to go read the thick books if you're not going to be able to do that on a weekend. I want to be realistic. YouTube can be your friend on some of these things. Yeah. But please do cleanse that palate, get the right movie in your theater, change the projector, everything. And realize that you are the main screenwriter of the first movie that begins playing in your child's head, right? So you could be a good screenwriter, or you could be a bad screenwriter when it comes to the movie that is developing in your child's head. And by 18, 19, 20 years old, sometimes much earlier, you can tell whether that movie was the right one or the wrong one, right? So anyways, it has been another Freedom Friday. Sharif, this is always so interesting and engaging for me. It's the best thing I do all week. Say it every week. It's fun. It's a laundromat. It's where I get to say jacked up backwards things, and you get to correct them for me too. Like, I appreciate that.
Listen, I appreciate what you bring to the table. Like, you're a parent, you are an activist, you are an educator. And so I think the combination, it's the collective, it's the conversations within the old heads that the young folks sit there and listen, but also they can chime in on. Right. And so that's why I appreciate the chat. You see elders, you see youth, you see us in between. And and it's this communal conversation that makes us all better, stronger, and smarter.
Yeah, actually, our collective is the best. The people who come and watch this and add to it or whatnot, it's life. That makes it all better for all of us. I appreciate you all for giving us this hour plus of your time. This week it's been an hour and 15 minutes, but time is a social construct. Time is just a social construct, sometimes with material consequences, but sometimes without material consequences. Anyways, it's been another Freedom Friday. You are still not free, but hopefully after this hour, you are freer than you were than when we began. We would love to hear any ideas or things that you think should be great topics for next week. And for the next couple of weeks, Sharif and I always bat around topics back and forth. And, we wait up until the last minute sometimes to come up with the one where we're like, yeah, that's the one.
What about this? No, we'll change this to that.
Yeah, make it something else.
Educational reparations, education debt. All right, let's go.
So all of y'all add something in here. Tell us what you think actually would make good topics, and we will cover it next time. Appreciate you all. Have a blessed weekend. Make sure you do the best for your kids. Every child in America, every child in the world is born with unsurpassable worth granted to them by a mighty, mighty God. We should wake up every day and actually fulfill that promise. It should be a mandate for us in how we behave in the world. We should put everything before them that makes them healthy. We should feed them all the right things. And I mean that in more than food. I mean that in the way, the things that nourish their soul and nurture their mind and their intellect. During their growing years, we are the only thing that they have that's between them and God. We are the thing. We are the president of their life and of their education and their intellectual development. And we should be ruthless about how we guard that part of their life. We should be ruthless. Let me say it again. Ruthless guardians of the best interest of our children. And we should kick all asses and take all names to make that happen. Thank you guys for watching us. This has been another Freedom Friday. Power to the people.
Most def.